Hello and welcome. We have a full weekend of content for you. First up is our series, Can Canada Get Its Mojo Back? Now, in this series, we've been looking at how Canada can transform its economy to meet the new world of AI. And while political issues are taking all of the oxygen out of the room lately, as we noted in our first episode on this series, this is a symptom. The fact that Canada's economy is so weak and that it's so vulnerable, while the tariff wars are important, even if Canada gets through this, and we hope we will, we still are stuck with the issue of how we transform our economy to prosper in the 21st century, in the age of AI, and the true emergence of the next digital revolution. Those of you who are fans of Project Synapse, our AI show, there is an episode that we did this week, and it's on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and search for @Tech Newsday. You have to type in the @ @Tech Newsday. Then just check out the videos for that channel and you'll find this week's Project Synapse. Or if it's simpler, you can just go to technewsday.com/podcast. technewsday.com. You can pick podcast out of the menu, or you can go /podcast after technewsday.com. It'll be there under #trending. I hope that's clear and that you can find what you're looking for. But for now, if you're sticking with this, grab a coffee, have a seat, put your headphones in, and let's listen to this episode of Can Canada Get Its Mojo Back? Welcome to the third in the series, Can Canada Get Its Mojo Back? My guest today is Benjamin Bergen. He's president of the Council of Canadian Innovators. I've been thrilled since I heard about the council, of getting you to be part of this series, because I think we agree in many ways that this isn't going to be one of those things where we pop a tariff and they have a tariff and then we get together, kiss and make up, and life will go on as it always has. I think there are deeper issues, and I wanted to discuss those with you. But before we get there, can you tell me a little bit, or tell our listeners a little bit, about who the Council of Canadian Innovators are and why they came into existence?
Yeah, no, that's a great kind of intro, and really happy to talk about the work that we do at the council, because I think our message right now has actually never been more salient and more needed for Canada. And in essence, the Council of Canadian Innovators is a group of CEOs and companies that are headquartered here in Canada that came together really under the auspices of how do we create wealth and prosperity for Canadians by building the goods that the world needs in order for us to have a successful economy and in order for us to continue to have a good quality of life. And so back in 2015, 2016, a group of CEOs got together and really felt that the public policy and decisions that were being made in this country really favored foreign multinationals. So branch plant economic models, thinking about the subsidies to things like Honda and other foreign companies and what they were looking to build here in Canada, and not really prioritizing how wealth and prosperity is created in the 21st century. And the premise behind CCI is very much that you cannot sell what you do not own. And we've got to begin building and creating things that we own as a country or as a people that we then sell to the rest of the world. And we've been beating this drum for the last decade, saying that Canada really has to figure out where it wants to play in the new global economy. How does it capture that wealth, keep that wealth here, so that we can have the social programs, the housing, the transit, all the things that make up a good society here in Canada. And if we don't figure out how to actually capture wealth in this new economy, we're actually going to find ourselves very poor. And what we're now experiencing in this Trump moment is not so much just what Trump has done, but actually our lack of preparedness in terms of getting our economy in order. And this is not a left or a right issue in this country. It's been a perennial challenge where we just have not done the right things in order to strengthen our economy as it has iterated into the 21st century and into a digital intangible economy. So that's really the premise of why we went from originally just 16 member companies to over 165 right across Canada that are building real solutions, solving real problems, and creating products, whether they be digital or physical, to actually sell not only to our own governments, not only to sell to other Canadian businesses, but actually to sell goods and services to the rest of the world.
You know, People would say that the branch plant economy, I guess that would be the basis of the Canadian industry. And we went through two successive free trade arrangements to make that possible. We have an integrated auto sector. All of those things have been beneficial to Canada. Why did that stop working?
I think the real strengths of what I can talk about are how I think that we actually need to diversify our economy and ways that we can do that by working with innovators. But I will go down a little bit of the rabbit hole with you on some of the more economic history narrative components. And in essence, the United States has changed, and I think it's changed for a number of reasons, where there's now concerns around their own economic security with the rise of China and semiconductor capacity, with the rise of technologies that have transformed how power dynamics work, right? Who controls information, how information is sent. The fact that one of the wealthiest or the wealthiest individual in the world can purchase what was the city square and being able to use it in ways that help transform or change society has been huge. And so I think we need to realize that the economic reality that we found ourselves in even 4 years ago is now fundamentally different. And the challenge that we right now are experiencing is determining what is the level of that severity. Worst case scenario, the idea of us becoming economically weakened, so much so that joining the United States becomes something that is palatable, I think is a real reality. And that's something we've got to fight hard against. I think it's the United States returning to a real mercantilist economic model where basically all of the high end goods and services are actually created in the United States. And then they basically are just fed by countries that produce and give them the raw materials required to either reindustrialize or be able to sell us high net goods. And so if the world is no longer the way that we think it was, we actually have to respond in a way that is as dramatic and as challenging as we think it is. And so the way out for us, as I see it, is a couple of different ways. One, we have to figure out how to get the goods and services that we have in our country currently to other markets, or to be able to access other markets so we can get a fair price for those goods. This is a huge issue with oil and gas in the province of Alberta, where in essence, all of our goods have to flow to the US and they ultimately get to determine things like price and help hamstring us. So we have to reassemble how we look at our natural resources, where we're willing to sell them to, how we get them to market. We have to make sure that we actually own those raw goods that we're able to sell. Now, that's step one. And I think that we're already seeing political alignment around how to do that, which is actually, I think, a really good thing. Regardless of whether you're left or right on the spectrum, a realization that we have to figure out how to get those goods that we produce that have value already to other markets is important. But that can only be step one. Step two, and this is actually, I think, the most critical step in all of this, is we actually have to look at where are the high value goods that we as Canadians can produce and that the world will want, regardless of the economic situation that we find ourselves in. And as we begin to figure out how to create high value goods, which can then create economic opportunity and help raise standards of living and productivity, that's really the moment that I think that we as Canadians need to seize, is that we can no longer be reliant on large foreign multinational firms to deliver economic prosperity and wealth in ways that they previously had. And that we fundamentally have to re-understand how the economy has shifted. And that, I think, is probably going to be the hardest part of this journey, is this relearning and this re-education around how we actually have to produce certain goods and certain services that will actually make us stronger, and that we then actually can then own and then sell to the rest of the world. And I think the over 165 companies that are members of CCI very much represent that basket of goods that we could potentially use to diversify our economy and then go out and sell to other markets, whether it be South America, Africa, Europe, China, Asia, all the other players that are going to need those services. And I think that's maybe where us having the crux of the conversation is really important, because I think it's in this second part that we're really going to need the most amount of collaboration, the most amount of folks coming together in order to determine what that new reality looks like. And it's going to have to be nonpartisan. It's going to have to be not focused on sort of regional smallness, where we sometimes as a country find ourselves navel gazing, and really think about how do we build a bigger vision of this country where we're creating the economic future that I think all of us are wanting.
Yeah. And I think the opportunity is there if we seize it. There's a couple of things that just, and maybe this is a bit of an off topic piece, but I think it speaks to this ability for us to get the real strength of Canadians. I've, I've always seen the American economy as a win-lose. It's a zero-sum game. I win and you lose. I don't think Canada's like that. I think that's both a strength and a weakness, that we collaborate more. And the example I gave is the other day, I was a riding president of PC party for a while. I had big fights with Jason Kenney, except yesterday. I heard Kenney speaking and I went, my God, we have more in common than we have difference at this point in our time. We can let those differences go. The other piece, and I may get mail on this, but is I'm an environmentalist. But I'm not going to say things like Alberta should just lose that oil and gas. Those are people's jobs. Those are people's livelihoods. And if we don't come together, and even in a world of, which I would hope would no carbon at one point, we have a way to get there. And people are going to be making that oil. We'd best help our fellow Canadians. I think I sense this as something that is coming to be. Are you getting that same feeling?
Yeah, very much. I think the small differences that may have actually divided us politically seem irrelevant, right? Like the Venn diagram now overlap of what is the country that we want to be, and the fact that we want to remain a country and remain sovereign and remain free and hold to the values that we as Canadians have built. And now it's time for us to transform our economy to meet those values. And I think your analysis is correct, right? Small divisions that you may have had with someone within your own political party have eroded. But look at the speeches that were given yesterday right across this country. You had Premier Wapenu in Manitoba, a New Democrat, give probably one of the most powerful speeches I have ever seen about what we as a country should be. I think all Canadians should go watch that. There is a person, a great Canadian, who is pushing the envelope about what we as a nation should be and doing it in a way that actually reflects our values. And then you move over to the province of Ontario, where you got Doug Ford being scrappy as hell in order to push back against American narratives about what's actually happening at our borders and what's actually happening economically. And so what we're beginning to see is a response from all Canadians. And look, let's extend it over to Quebec as well, right? Separatism has collapsed, where people are saying, look, we might not agree with the English speaking part of Canada in every way, shape, or form, but sure as hell, we got more in common with them than we do with what's happening south of the border. And as we begin to get our political mojo back, that's really the first step, right? The first step is getting leaders saying, look, we got to look past the small differences and begin to collectively think about how to solve this. And I think right now you're seeing that actually happen as we gear up for a federal election, where whether it be Mark Carney or Chrystia Freeland or Pierre Poilievre, the alignment around some of the economic narrative is becoming smaller and smaller, where you've got Carney and Freeland talking about reversing things like the carbon tax, where you've got them moving backwards on things like capital gains, realizing that now is not the time to impede our own domestic innovators with taxation that may lead to them having to leave the country in order to be successful. So I think the exciting piece right now is that we are getting political alignment. And I think to my earlier comments about solving the resource piece, right? Figuring out how we export more of it, get more of it to diverse markets, and own what we're actually doing as one. And now we need to step into the second phase, to your point earlier, where, look, the relationship with the United States is damaged. And I think that we have to be sadly a little pragmatic, that this is not just Donald Trump. This is actually ideas that are beginning to take hold in the American politic, where regardless of who maybe is holding the position of power in the White House, you're going to see this type of either mercantilist economic narrative continue to emerge because of the national security threat that I think the United States is feeling that it's experiencing. That reality may come in a more thoughtful packaging, but I still think the economic reality of tightening the screws on countries that are not necessarily involved in US politics is a reality we're now in.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And this is the last piece of political. I want to get onto the technology part and the innovation part of our discussion. But I think people don't realize that the Democrats or Republicans are not our friends when it comes to trade. I think we've never realized this. Joe Biden, bless his heart, was sitting there going, "Buy American." Why can't we say, without a crisis, "Buy Canadian"?
I think there's a couple reasons here. And this is now actually, I think, where we're going to get to the underbelly of some real issues in this country. And let's talk about those. I think first things first, we really believed in laissez-faire economics. We thought that everyone was going to play fair. We thought everyone was going to just basically compete on ideas and compete in markets. And the thing is, there's no such thing as free markets, right? You have large countries like the United States shaping public policy in their favor. And they use this with like things like their defense tactics. They use this with trade agreements. And the idea that markets are necessarily free has never actually been a reality. But I think we as Canadians truly believe that. And we believe that by harmonizing to the United States and our near proximity and access to it in a rules-based order was the best approach. And I think that began to erode and shift and change as technology came about and shifted the way that power dynamics work and began to shift how different countries began to interact with each other. Thinking about Russia and China, Iran, and other jurisdictions. And so the problem partially in Canada is that we haven't updated our economic thinking and how that ties to security and how that ties to sovereignty. And I would say that part of that challenge has been how structurally we've been organized as a country. And the big one I will say there is when you often look at other institutions or organizations that exist. So let's take something like the Business Council of Canada. I think those are organizations full of good people. So I don't want you to think that I'm going after them as individuals. But when you allow foreign firms to sit within your portfolio of advocacy and lobbying, the policies that you push for ultimately benefit those who have the most amount of money. So the Business Council of Canada was originally created actually around NAFTA, right? So it was a way for different businesses to basically come together to say that we actually need free trade. And so its whole structure and purpose is really designed around how to facilitate a lot of branch plant economic modeling, not looking at what are the ways that Canada can be more strategic in order to actually grow its economy and to actually diversify its economy and to capture wealth in value chains. And so when you look at how certain trade negotiations have gone, the Council of Canadian Innovators is often actually one of the outliers, right? We'll look at things like a dispute resolution system, which constantly is dragging Canadian firms down to Texas courts, making it very difficult for them to win in IP challenges that are occurring, right? And so when you have a system which overwhelmingly favors and supports foreign firms, it weakens them and makes it very difficult for them to go and compete. And so I think one of the things that we really have to think about as we continue the conversation about how we're going to diversify our economy by selling goods to the rest of the world, who's participating in those conversations? And I'll make the argument really hard that I think that it has to be Canadian firms that are the ones actually having these conversations. And we actually have to keep out foreign firms' ability to interfere with that, because increasingly what we've seen time and time again is that when public policy is being discussed, we don't actually get to, as I jokingly refer to it as Maslow's pyramid of higher innovation, right? We always get stuck at the root level, which is more talent. And foreign multinational firms want to be able to hire Canadians because they are talented, but we don't get to those higher levels of things like ownership, of things like building globally headquartered firms. And so in order for us to begin to move up that pyramid of where wealth and prosperity is created, we actually fundamentally have to change some of the structures that exist within this country. And I think for us to have those conversations, it actually has to be Canadians having them with Canadians and really taking an approach of how we build certain sectors of our economy. That is something that I think we in the business community need to begin pushing on in order for our government and our political class, which I think has rallied. I think it's met the moment. And now it's up to the business community here in Canada to do the same, to come to the table and say, look, these are all the solutions that we can provide. These are all the opportunities that we have. These are the things that we do that are world class and that we can sell around the world, and really work hand in glove to achieve economic security and wealth and prosperity at the same time.
Yeah. One of the things that seems to be broken, I keep going back to this. Sorry, I'm just so thrilled to hear the number 160 companies. As I'm talking, I'm going through in my mind saying, who are these companies? Where are they coming from? Where's all this innovation there? Because I don't think Canadians know how much innovation is happening. And because even if we're thinking about natural resources, we forget how much technological innovation can go into retrieving them, into bringing them to use in an environmentally sustainable way. All of those things
Yeah.
are so important. That must be one of the great joys of doing what you're doing, is looking out and seeing those companies and their innovations.
Yeah, no, like, look, I think the job that I have at the council of bringing together and organizing is an extremely rewarding job because it's me coming face to face with brilliant people who care about this country and want to try and build something here. All of the companies that I work with are headquartered in Canada. All of them are employing thousands or tens of thousands of people that are not only earning good paying jobs, but they're actually getting and owning equity in these firms. They're getting to actually participate in the wealth that's being generated. And we need more of that. We need to have a wealth and prosperity strategy in this country. Whereas previously, we very much had a job strategy where we thought that if people worked at assembly lines or if people worked for in tech doing R&D, that was sufficient. And what we've realized as you look at, a lot of the key economic indicators is that this was backsliding for the last 25 years, right? This is not something that we've just woken up to. A year ago, we had the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada come out and say that we had a productivity crisis and we have to break glass and begin to actually do the right types of investment in order for us to get the firms that I'm talking about to be able to be successfully and being able to scale and grow. And what we've done at CCI is really done a catalog of what are the issues that these firms are facing. And they fall into four buckets. They fall into access to capital. They fall into access to talent, right? Do we have the workers and the folks that we actually need to build these companies? It falls into access to customers. And the big one there is government procurement. And we're actually going to come back to that, Jim, a number of times later in the conversation, I promise you.
Absolutely.
And then the last bucket really is around what we call freedom to operate or marketplace frameworks. The things like IP, data, standards and regulations, privacy. What are the things that governments make permissible or not permissible? And so it's those four areas that we at the council have looked at where the problems are, and then really focused on what are solutions that we can deploy to help these firms become innovative and to be able to sell their goods around the world. And what we really employ all governments, whether they be federal or provincial, left or right, is forming relationships and building relationships with domestic firms that can solve your problems. Because when they solve your problems, they're also solving the problems of the world. And I think we as a country still have a fantastic brand. We still are the ninth largest economy in the world. So we are not small, right? And we actually have some real opportunity now to shake off old economic thinking around industrial policy that was branch plant led and think about how do we build our own world headquartered firms that are selling the things that people need.
Yeah. And let's address the elephant in the room, and that is the government itself. I heard from one major Canadian business person, and I won't reveal it because it was a private conversation, but I think I'll share what was there. I presented to him, I said, why does the government always seem to talk about small business and then stomp on small business? And, and he said, and it was laughter, but it was a sad laughter, that they really do. They get in the way of innovation more than anything. And I'll give you an example. We'll talk about purchasing. Doug Ford tore up a contract with Elon Musk for $100 million. Congratulations to Doug Ford. There are two companies that even I know about who make satellites for around the world, the best in the world. One of them sitting in his own province, another sitting in Quebec. And why aren't they building the satellite network for internet for us?
I've actually posted on this, and I don't know if you actually want to reveal the company that does this in Ontario. It's Telestat. That is the company that does it in Ontario and does world-class satellites. It's a company that's existed for decades and has world-cutting technology. They're actually not a member of the Council of Canadian Innovators, just so folks don't think that I'm necessarily just plugging them. They should be members. But what I would say is this is the way that we have to think about security and thinking about dual use purpose, right? We need to help develop and strengthen our own capabilities in areas like telecommunications, realizing that those are now actually tied to economic defense, right? We've seen this in Ukraine with things like drones and how they're being used and deployed, everything from complex mapping to figuring out where there are issues. But these technologies not only have the benefit from a telecommunications perspective or from a defense perspective, but also from areas like environmental. One of the member companies that we work with does 3D imaging and mapping that actually helps cities right now in Canada determine where things like climate change will be most impactful by looking at floodplains and looking at where weather surges may occur from challenges of new types of weather, and figuring out how we actually purchase solutions like Telestat, which are world class, that then can also be sold to other governments. If you're an emerging economy right now, who are you wanting to now buy your telecommunications from? Is it China? Do you actually think that Huawei is an acceptable technology solution where we know there's real concerns around national security? Are you wanting to purchase it from Elon Musk, who we've now seen use it as a political tool in terms of trying to extract opportunity for America? And I think the answer is no. And so there right now, globally, is a sweet spot for middle powers to build a great technology and then sell it to other jurisdictions in other parts of the world. And that's really how we're going to get out of this mess. It's going to be by figuring out what the world needs, selling it, and being able to have our own economic strength. And that, I think, is something that we need to be nonpartisan. We need it to be immediate. And again, Jim, I think that we're actually seeing political alignment on this. We had the Premier of Nova Scotia basically come out and saying, we are completely rethinking our procurement and how we're looking at this. And that, I think, is a green light, but we've now actually got to get us into the position where it is no longer just rhetoric, it's actually being actioned.
I don't think, and I keep saying this, and I can say it because as long as I was a consultant, so I can't reveal any details of things, but I can, as a Canadian, say if Canadians don't realize that their procurement is fundamentally broken, and it is, I'm going to use the technical term, it is pissing away their tax dollars on big companies that slough all the risk back to the government because of the way they structure their purchasing. For instance, if you look through federal purchasing, everything is weighted towards a company that's so large, it has to be American. There is no facility for a small company to earn a contract. Everything gets in the way. And yet our civil servants, and bless them, this is not the people who are making the decisions in the room. This is the policy that they are given to execute. This is the way they're told to do it. And by the way, take all the risk out of it. And so don't innovate, don't take a chance on a Canadian company. Take it, buy the sure thing, which will have an overrun anyway. As a Canadian, I want to bite the edge of my desk off because of this. And it not only penalizes Canadian businesses, it's penalizing the taxpayer. What do you do about this?
Look, we've done actually two big reports on this over the last number of years, and the traction that they're getting, I would say, is actually quite exciting. And one of them is called Buying Ideas, and the other is Building Winners. And the first one, Buying Ideas, looks very much at, okay, how do governments actually need to purchase technology in a 21st century economy, right? So let's take something like government purchasing cybersecurity solutions. Government actually needs to collaborate with domestic cybersecurity companies to help them understand what the issue is. One of the interesting things is that our government actually purchases a lot less domestic cybersecurity from Canadian companies than any of our Five Eye partners. So our Five Eye partners actually purchase way more Canadian cybersecurity solutions than our own government. What we actually need to have happen is have our governments go to innovators and say, look, these are problems we're experiencing. Can you help us solve them? Can you go in and look at what are the types of solutions or services that you can provide that will shield us from different forms of economic hacking, that can shield us and help us strengthen networks so we can continue to communicate? And so it needs to walk that line of defense and cybersecurity and how that ties into economic strength. And We did this with the Royal Mounted Police. We realized that we had a vast Western territory that needed to be defended, and we had to create a system in order to do that, in order to have rules, order, and good governance. And we need to now do that digitally as well. And who needs to be out there enforcing and protecting Canadians? Turns out it needs to be Canadians. And so if we're able to actually provide and build cybersecurity firms, which we've already done, this is the good thing. You don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, and then actually take those solutions that we're actually building here. And sure as hell, they're going to be desired in other parts of the world that are experiencing this and maybe don't have the technical capacity to do it. But in order for them to continue to economically grow and to have a free society, they're going to need these types of solutions in order to move forward. I think cybersecurity and defense is a huge area where we as Canadians need to purchase more. And that's one area. And I think there's other areas in the economy as well where we actually could be world leaders and help solve really big problems that we have here in Canada, but then also lead to us being able to sell those goods elsewhere. I think healthcare is another huge area where there's a real opportunity here, but I don't want to dive too deep into that one if you want to
Well,
on some of the
my
other
audience is
things.
technical and certainly understands technology. This is another place that just drives me crazy is we know that we have some of the best minds in AI in this country and
Yeah.
still many more. Yes, Jeffrey Hinton may have gone to work for Google. He's back into the fold, I think, a little bit. Others have gone, but there are so many bright people around and people without doctors. And we
Yeah.
still don't apply technology to medicine. It's absolutely insane.
So I think that this is a huge opportunity. I think we as all Canadians care about universal healthcare to some degree. I know it's something that you definitely get people to rally behind and to defend. So let's use that Canadian value of everyone having access to healthcare as a way to actually reform a system that uses technology solutions that makes not only the patient experience better, but saves lives, creates jobs, and creates goods that we can then go sell elsewhere. And I'll give you a couple of examples, of member companies that are part of CCI. We've got Able Innovation, which builds robots that helps to turn and move patients in hospitals and in long-term care facilities. Right now, to move an individual can sometimes take up to 6 people to move that human that's needing to experience, whether it be bed turning or areas around surgery. And if you can use technology to limit that to just having to be one person, you're finding massive forms of efficiency. And what we know in the healthcare system is that there are not enough people in order to facilitate the needs that are actually out there, right? As we have an aging population, as we have people beginning to leave the workforce, the needs on these types of solutions is only going to grow. And these solutions are also going to grow in other jurisdictions, right? They're going to grow in Europe, they're going to grow in Asia, where figuring out how to use the manpower and the human power that we have to help facilitate better care is going to need to be augmented by technology. And we have a tremendous amount of that technology here in Canada. There's going to be ways that we're going to need to augment labor. And how do we do it through technology solutions like robotics? And then there's other areas where how do we build solutions that help us do preventative care? If we can see certain diseases and certain issues coming down the pipeline, whether they be things like diabetes or cancer, how do we cut those off and help people get healthy sooner and faster? That will have a tremendous amount of value as well. And how do we use digital services to also speed up the work that those are doing? A company like Health, based out in Vancouver, helps hospitals or clinics build more efficient systems where you're not having to have doctors doing paperwork or nurses doing paperwork, where you're removing their sort of office time into actually patient time. And that's going to be really important for us as a country to move forward. And when we think about these massive government spends, I think in Ontario, it's close to 50% is of our budget is towards healthcare. It's equaling around $200 billion a year. That's huge. And we also have to begin to think about what did we learn from the pandemic? What did we learn about our inability to actually access vaccines? Imagine now if we enter into a real situation with bird flu, where we're beginning to see some concerns about it spreading to humans. Now, I don't want to be an alarmist, but being pragmatic about where we're going to get and build the vaccines in a way that protects Canadians is huge. And We saw with Donald Trump when things like masks were hard to get, that masks that we had purchased that were coming from the United States to Canada were potentially going to be held up at the border. And I think that we need to remind ourselves that if there is going to be another major health emergency, do we have the right technologies and do we have the right ability to actually respond to these types of crises? And that I think is something that we also have to take into real consideration. And that's not just about us having the capacity to make vaccines, but actually having the capacity to iterate and to build vaccines that are actually going to prevent the spread of certain viruses.
It is not if, it's when we have another pandemic. The history have taught us that they will come from time to time. There's not anything you do about it. But we don't build the resilience into our economy. One of the things I just marvel at is the United States, what is it, $12 American for a dozen eggs? Why aren't we as affected? We have smaller producers. We don't have million chicken farms that where if one animal gets sick, you have to destroy them all. We have an opportunity to use technology and to have a more resilient economy at the same time. Anybody who thinks that farmers don't use technology, if you still have that view that farmers are out there and they're out in the field all the time, just spraying seeds around and things like that, these guys are so astute and so technologically advanced. And if we had more tools for them, that they'd do even more for our food supply.
Yeah. John Deere Tractor, the company is a technology company, right? It's about data. It's about IP. It's about super technical things. And that's the other thing that I think we've all got to wake up to is that all companies are now technology companies. And if you're not in business for that much longer. And so that's the piece here that I think we have to also realize is that in order for us to capture the wealth from, let's say, traditional resources, we also have to think about how are we building the companies that do those types of traditional resources and keep them here in Canada. We have a proud history of having large mining companies that were Canadian headquartered. That has really declined, right? There's a reason why we had large presence in places like Chile and others as a country, because we had technical expertise in terms of how to do that mining. And more of that is being done by technology. And if we don't own the technology that's actually building those firms, you eventually don't end up owning those firms anymore because all of the value in the value chain has moved over to the technology solutions that actually are solving the problems of how to get minerals or oil and gas out of the earth more effectively and cheaper than traditional methods of doing it. So it's paramount for us to solve these problems in areas where we're already selling certain goods and services. But I do think that second piece that we're spending a bit more time on now around that diversification is also critical for the long-term future of the country.
And I think ownership matters. And I'll give you a practical example. I've been in tech for 40 years. I did a fair amount of my consulting and my work with Canadian mining companies. They took me around the world. I had an experience that was just incredible for a kid from Thunder Bay, moves and can travel the world and be talking to governmental officials, to be dealing with big solutions, being proud of being Canadian. The minute the Brazilian company bought Inco, everybody like me was gone. We were shut down almost instantly. All of those local contractors, all of those small tech businesses like I was running, all gone. And no longer could we take a technological solution to the head office of an international company and know the people and be part of the solution around the world. We're just frozen out. And I think people don't realize that without the ownership of companies being here, without the head offices being here, you lose a great deal of the opportunity to bring technology solutions to companies.
I think that's a huge piece that we actually need to be very cognizant of. And the other thing is when you remove headquartered offices from the country, the expertise leaves as well. And the muscle memory of how to do that leaves as well. That really does hurt your ability to innovate and to grow other firms and to recycle and create that talent here in Canada. The number of senior leadership of companies that are members of CCI that have some sort of connection to BlackBerry or Nortel is massive. It's
Yep.
huge in terms of people that have that expertise that they came from that are now in all of these other firms that are trying to grow and to scale. And so Part of the challenge that we have in Canada is we lack a political or sorry, a economic or business class that has scaled businesses from 10 million to 100 million and beyond. And part of the work that we do at the council is to connect those types of leaders who have those experiences. One of the things that we started doing a number of years ago is a CEO summit that's just domestically headquartered firms. And we held it in Montreal last year in the old port. And the hugest value that came out of that was having folks from Victoria to Newfoundland or St. John's, Newfoundland, come together and basically talk about the issues and the challenges that they're facing as Canadian entrepreneurs and how they have solved those problems. And the exciting thing is the number of partnerships that came out of that event where you have CEOs beginning to sell to other CEOs their solutions. And you begin to have different Canadian financial investors realizing some of the real opportunities. And so dollars beginning to flow. And so part of our job at the council is how do you begin to build that network of business leaders that are all rowing in the same direction about how to scale and grow their businesses here, how to solve those problems, and how to actually communicate those to government so that we can get industry and government working collectively together to solve this problem around security, prosperity, and really our economic future.
Yeah. And the one thing I don't want to leave our audience with is this idea that the government in the past hasn't invested or that we haven't made money available. We've had some great programs from the NRC to other programs, some of the finest university programs in the world in Waterloo and Toronto, Montreal, Calgary. There are universities that have fantastic programs. We train people, we bring them up, we even give them some money to become innovators. And then two things happen. One is, as you've taught at Waterloo for innovation, and every time somebody would come, a young person would come in with a great tech idea. Their idea was, I want to build it just enough to get bought. And who can blame them? Because everything that gets to a certain size gets sold. And I think Colin Deacon called it the leaky bucket. And how do we solve that problem?
Yeah. So I think it's structural. I think that we often articulate that we think it's culture, but I think that it's a structural issue that fundamentally what it comes down to is we don't have a structure where it makes it easier for firms to scale. So like the example I'll give you is we have sort of an alphabet soup of different programs for companies that are in the startup space, right? So they can be funded by Shred programming or IRAP or superclusters or a myriad of different types of grants. And these companies get these grants or these subsidies or these different types of opportunity, but they build their product and then they struggle to actually find customers. They struggle to find customers within our own government. They struggle to find customers within large enterprises here that are in some ways often oligopolies and less actually dynamic firms that are actually competing. And so they look elsewhere. They look to the United States to sell their goods. They look to Europe. Look, it's probably predominantly the US because it's such a large market. If you think of a company like Point Click Care, where I think something like 96% of their sales is coming from the US, why would you stay here is really part of the challenge, or how challenging it is to actually build a firm here. And so when you then get pushed up against harsh economic realities, like we're seeing with things like these potential tariffs and other issues, and Buy America, it becomes really hard to remain in Canada to actually sell your products and your goods. And so a logical step of exiting actually makes sense. Okay, let's create the most kind of value we can as quickly as possible and then flip the company. And so that isn't an irrational response when you don't actually have an ecosystem that champions building large firms that are able to compete globally. And so ways that we can begin to reverse that is a lot of the things that we talk about with the council. Step one, how are we actually deploying capital through this sort of alphabet soup of different programs that we have? Is it efficient, right? We have a real pray and spray approach where we give small pockets of money to literally 18,000 people in Shred, or 18,000 companies or projects alone in something like Shred. That's not a very focused area where you're diffusing dollars. And then when you add on top of that, of the $4 billion a year that's roughly allocated towards Shred programming, 50% of it is going to 20 firms that are potentially Canadian in name only, meaning we're continuing to fund the R&D up until relatively recently of companies like Huawei, where we know that China is an easier example for us to make, but we're actually funding the R&D of foreign firms that are taking intellectual property out of the country. I think we have got to think about how we're deploying those types of dollars to help companies. And then we got to think about how are we looking at it from a talent perspective? Are we helping to keep the smart people that we need here? And then third, is our government actually buying the solutions that these companies are putting forward? And if they're not, why not? And how do we begin to erode those walls so that when a good idea makes it to market, the government actually can buy it? And nothing turns a small company into a big company like a purchase order. And that really is what these firms need, is they need a purchase order. And if they get a purchase order, then they can go to banks and say, hey, we got all this money and we want to expand. And we now want to sell to Mexico and we want to sell to Great Britain and we want to sell to France and we want to sell to Germany. So that's part of the flywheel that we got to fix in this country. Now is the moment. Let's not waste this crisis. Let's not waste the commitment that we're now getting from a political class, and that I think increasingly we're now getting from Canadians and from the business class, that we can do this. We all just got to begin rowing together and really begin to uncork some of these challenges.
One thing you've talked about, and I'll just raise it as a question or maybe something to share, and that is, there's a little bit of background. There's a great billion-dollar tech company, DMR, which was one of the best places to work in the world. And for those people in the technology audience, if you wonder where portfolio management came from in terms of IT, it came from DMR. I ran the management consulting practice around the world, but it also brought something else out, and it was the pursuit of outcomes. And that changed technology, in terms of how we manage technology. We started to look at not the inputs, but the outcomes from technology. I wonder if our government could ever get to that. We talk about how much money we spend. We don't talk about what we get from it. And until we make that fundamental shift, I don't think we're going to appreciate the 160 companies and what outcomes they bring to our economy.
Yeah, I think the economic crisis that we find ourselves in, the slow moving aspect of it, which has been the sort of productivity prosperity decline over the last 25 years, now matched with the economic threats that we're experiencing from Trump and from a US administration, I think is that catalyst. If nothing is going to wake us from this slumber, then we're in real issue. But this has awoken us. This has literally aligned the political spectrum of our country around needing to repel this. And I think we'll definitely respond with the first piece, which is that movement towards getting the current goods that we have to more markets. That I am convinced about. The area where I am concerned, I would say the most, is the second piece, which is this diversification. And I think it's incumbent on folks like myself and others to get out there and to sell this vision to Canadians that, yes, we can do this. Yes, we have the capabilities and the capacity. And we've aligned our political mojo. And now we've got to align our economic mojo to do this. And we've done this as a country in the past. How we unlocked all of the oil and gas out of Alberta was through a partnership between Canadian technology companies, the University of Alberta, and the provincial government to create AOSTRA, which unlocked all of that great opportunity and all of that intellectual property. So we can do this. We do have the capability. The question is, can we meet the moment in terms of the time that we have to do this? Resolving a federal election, I think, is actually really important. We need to get this dealt with so that we have a government that is able to begin to plan for long terms. But in that long-term planning, there needs to be alignment between left, center, right of where are the areas we're really going to try and double down on, whether that be cybersecurity. I think that should be, dual purpose defense technology, and something like healthcare, where we as Canadians can all get on board, because the world as we knew it is over. And even if there is a reneging on these tariffs in the short term, I think we need to be very cognizant that America's interests have shifted, and it's not just one individual who is leading this charge. It is an administration.
Yeah. And just for my American listeners, and I do have them, our argument is not with the people of America. Our argument is with building a strong neighbor who can help make us all wealthier, and rising tide lifts all boats. Canada being on the ropes is not good for North America. And having a powerful neighbor that has got wealth is not a bad thing for the United States either. We're a big customer and will remain that way no matter what happens.
Yeah, very much agree.
So my audience is a technology audience for the most part, or people who are running technology companies or people who are interested. What can we do? The
Yeah.
council's doing great things. What could we do to help you?
Yeah. First things first, if you are working at a company that can become a member of CCI, consider it. We didn't get too much into it. We're a nonpartisan group of Canadians that are trying to build wealth and prosperity and really fight for this future that I've been talking about. And getting involved in supporting our work is, I would say, top ability in order to help us with that work. And we're not for profit. We're only funded by domestic Canadian headquartered companies. We don't take money from government. We don't take money from foreign multinationals. So we're pure as the driven snow in terms of our perspective on how to get Canada where it needs to go in order to build a future we all want. Get involved, I would say, with us as an organization. But second, get involved as a citizen, engage with the political class, right? We just had an election here in Ontario. We have a federal election coming. Letting politicians and the political class and bureaucracies know that we actually have to do some of the things that I've been talking about, supporting domestic firms, diversifying our portfolio of what we're offering the world, and really building Canadian capacity is the only long-term way out of there. And to say that that's the type of thing that will actually get votes. That's the actual type of activity that will, cause us as Canadians to be more involved in the ideas that are being pushed by politicians and by civil servants and by our political class. So I think I love Timothy Snyder, an academic who says that democracy is a verb, not a noun. And I think that is really true. It's about getting engaged. It's about participating. And we can do this as a country. Great challenges and the opportunities on the other side of it are actually wonderful. And I think using this crisis, using the turmoil that is coming out south of the border as a way for us to reshore and to reframe who and what our values are and how we transpose those into the world through economic reality, I think is one of the greatest projects that we as Canadians will get to work on.
My guest today has been Benjamin Bergen, President of the Council of Canadian Innovators. Thank you so much, sir, and we hope to have you back.
Jim, thanks so much for having me.
And that's our show. Thanks a lot for listening. You had a lot of things you could have done with your weekend or your time, and you spent it with us. We're very appreciative. Love to hear what you think. Send me a note at editorial@technewsday.ca. If you want to see more stories like this or hear more stories like this, check out civicspace.ca, where we have the entire series posted and some other additional articles that you might find interesting. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.